Hello and welcome. Kristian Livolsi. I'm your host of the Business Growth Mindset podcast. And today I have a special guest in Stephan Wiedner. Stephan is a psychological safety expert whose career has focused on developing sustainable high-performance leaders, teams, and organizations. His passion for unleashing the collective potential of people has led him to co-found Nomi.com, the web's largest network of independent life coaches, and Skillsetter.com, the deliberate practice platform for interpersonal skills, as well as Zorango.com, the psychological safety training expert. Stephan has been a guest speaker of AC Tech, CEO Roundtables, Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, Building Psychology Strength podcast, and many other audiences interested in psychology, business, and technology. His writing has been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur, and other popular publications. Stephan is married with 2 children and enjoys spending quality time in the outdoors, hiking, biking, camping, and reading. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Mindset Podcast Series 3. I'm your host, Kristian Livolsi, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome all the way from Canada my guest, Stephan Wiedner, who is the CEO of Nomi.com and Zangaro.com. Stephan, welcome.
Kristian, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Mate, it is such an honor to meet you. First, I just can't believe I just stuck my hand in the camera to meet you. But more importantly, thank you for making the time to join us. You'll be pleased to know that this morning I got the update. We are ranked in the top 100 podcasts in Australia right now. I got an update this morning, and I sat there and I was like, "Wow, that just blew me away." I wasn't expecting to be back in the 100. I think we're in position 62, and I thought that was really cool. You come in and out of it quite regularly, and we in the US we tend to pop in and out of that. So it's for a little old podcast on all things cool about people. We're really chuffed, and we can't do that without our amazing listeners. So thank you to all of our listeners who support us and inspire us, and hopefully you're going to inspire them today by sharing a little bit about your story. So, Stephan, why don't we get started? And I'm going to ask you straight up to tell the audience and to tell me just a little bit about you, but from the perspective of where you have come from and where you are today.
Thank you for the question. Congratulations, by the way, on cracking the top 100. And yeah, no pressure. Geez, I feel like I really have to provide some amazing wisdom. So I'll do my best. Let's just put it that way. And I'll start by my early years, my formative years in elementary school, high school, etc. So all throughout those early days, I did exceedingly well in school. I was good at art. I was good at science. I was good at sports. Everything came really easy to me. And of course, I grew up in a small town, so it wasn't like a stiff competition, if you will. But what did I know? Everything came easy to me, and I got a lot of positive reinforcement along those lines. So whether it was my athletic coaches or my teachers saying, "Wow, you're really, really gifted, you're really talented," et cetera, et cetera. And then what happened is I applied to go to university, and I got into university in an engineering program at UBC, which is the big university in British Columbia, Canada, in the city of Vancouver. And there was, I think at the time, 38,000 students. And these are all A students, right? You can't go to university without being at the top of your class sort of thing. And suddenly I struggled in my first year because I wasn't suddenly the top performer without even trying. And it was a significant adjustment for me there to suddenly realize, I'm having a hard time. And I fast forward a few years, like I struggled through, and I end up readjusting, and I end up choosing a different specialization in university and graduated and worked, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward a few years, and I read this book by Angela Duckworth, called Grit. You're probably familiar with it. And many listeners, I would hope, are very familiar with it too. Well, what caught my attention in that book is this one chapter about, I think what she called them, something fragiles. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but the idea is they were looking at West Point and all of these students that were applying and getting into West Point. And in their first 2 weeks, they have this incredible onboarding process where it's just grueling. And they have the best applicants across the country. And lo and behold, out of those top 500, a certain percentage of them fail out of that first 2-week intensive period, right? And they didn't know, how do we determine which of those folks get through and which of them don't? They're all A+ students. And it turned out that there's a group of those individuals that are applying for and getting into West Point for whom life is easy. Education is easy. Sports is easy. Everything is easy for them. They just have a nice natural base of talent from which they grow. And when they suddenly are encountered really challenging environments, they don't have the resilience to continue to grow and adapt and learn and all that sort of stuff. And so that was me. When I read that, I'm like, oh my goodness, yeah, that was me, because I was getting all this reinforcement that you're talented and you're gifted, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a tough pill to swallow when I suddenly wasn't the top of my class easily, just like that, with a snap of my fingers. And so that forced me to really learn about psychology and learn about resilience. And I really dove into positive psychology there at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, when it first kind of became a thing. And so here I am, X number of years later. I don't know if I want to say how many years that is, Kristian, but you get the idea. I've spent the last 15 or so years in the world of coaching, human resource development, leadership development, training, etc.
Awesome. So I love how you just you could relate to something that Angela had written in Grit, and Grit is an outstanding book on resilience. And I actually talk a lot about resilience. I wrote an entire series called Full Metal Jacket. Metal obviously spelt differently, but there's this entire generation, and I don't think it's just these incredibly high achievers like yourself and others. I think there's an entire generation that doesn't actually understand resilience. We had deep challenges with the baby boomers, for example, who, probably grew up a little too resilient, unloved, right? And then they obviously overloved and sheltered. And now we're facing this next era of total entitlement. And when they can't get their own way, we have, all these woke people. We have all these people that are just coming out, and the minority groups really screaming. So you see these transitions, and it's interesting that you date them back. But Stephan, what's your point of view on how do we make the next generation more resilient? What are the things that we need to teach our children, for example, or business leaders for that matter, right? Young emerging business leaders. What are some of the things that we could teach them?
Well, it's an appropriate question. I have 2 teenage kids at home. So I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old daughter. So 16-year-old son and 13-year-old daughter. So I'm right in the heart of this very question as my children are aging and we're approaching them fleeing the nest, right? So I'm asking myself, have I prepared my children for the eventual exit that they'll be taking? And what more can I be doing? It's very palpable for me. I just want to share that. And, the first thing I would say is put your children in environments where they can fail. That is probably the first thing that we can do. So it's not about teaching them anything. It's about giving them challenges wherein they will fail and have them learn from that. Because I was reminded of that recently watching a clip on Netflix about an individual. I can't remember his name. He's a rock climber, and he rocked, I think it's called The Wall, and he free climbed this crazy, I'm not much of a climber, so I don't know all of the terminology. So forgive me there. And when he was telling about his life story, his dad took him on these crazy hikes and climbs when he was 4, 5, 6 years old. So by the time he was 8, he'd encountered all sorts of troubles, all sorts of challenges that he had to overcome. Whereas I think we as parents, we want to make it as easy as possible for our kids. Maybe not all parents, but certainly I think there's a good amount of us parents that can relate to that, wanting to give our kids as much comfort and ease as possible. And yet we need to put them in environments where they're going to fail, where they're not going to be the best. And I think they're going to learn.
Mate, I absolutely love that, Stephan. I think that is brilliant. And I think also a lot of my listeners, if not all of them, know that I'm a proud failing forward person. So having endured a tremendous amount of failure in my life, and some very public, and built huge resilience along the way. That is really good advice. And you know what I love about that advice? It's not just for children. I think there's some deep intelligence in that statement. Put people in environments where they can fail. Don't set them up for failure, but put them in environments where they have the opportunity to fail and see how they go. It's no different to, someone once said to me, Kristian, I can't believe you threw your, 2-year-old daughter into the swimming pool. Like, I'm standing right next to her. Like, I'm in the water, right? Like, she's either going to sink or swim. And let me tell you something, survival of the fittest says that they're going to swim. They're not going to sink. And so, I'm there. And that's essentially how we taught our children to swim. We have a pool at home. And, I think swimming pools are one of the scariest things on the planet because so many children drown. And a lot of it is because they've never been taught to free fall in the water from a very early age. And, interestingly enough, I grew up in Europe and swimming was the sport that I did as a junior, between that and football or soccer, because I grew up in Europe. So the reality of it is you just got thrown in the water and you're a water baby. But I still have a huge fear of, my children ever going in the pool, even though they're excellent swimmers. Do you know what I mean? Because it's such a dangerous habitat. But give them the opportunity to fail and then encourage them to grow, encourage them to learn. And, my daughter, for example, is just the biggest fish. She could be in the water when it's 6 degrees. And it's like, Lavender, what are you doing? It's freezing. Oh, I love the water, Papa. Oh my God, you're just too cute. By the way, my kids are the other end of your 16 and 13-year-old. My son is 7 and my daughter is going to be 5 in a month. So, that's why getting parenting advice is great because it's not my strength. But I have to work very hard at it and I love it. But Stephan, that is a really good golden nugget and I really appreciate you sharing that. Tell us a little bit, you've told us a little bit about you, but share a little bit about Numi.com and Zarango.com. And don't just tell me the story of how you got there, but more, I'd like to know the why behind those companies, because I think there's a really neat story around psychological safety that you might want to share with us. So, yeah, back to you.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So I appreciate you trying to bring out the best in what I can offer your audience with your great question. So that our company, so I say our because I have a business partner. So the two of us, we've been working together for quite a few years now. As I mentioned, almost 15 plus years. And we, I think, had a shared interest in 3 things. We've always been interested in psychology, interested in business, and also interested in technology and how those things fit together. And so our original concept was to have 2 people coach each other because we thought, gosh, this thing called coaching, how do we make it more accessible and more available to as many people as possible? So that's what we started, because really the kernel of truth, or what we're really aiming for, is unleashing people's potential, because we know that technology is abound and it's growing. We're using more and more of it. And we are constantly asking ourselves the question, what do we as humans do really well? Because there's some things that for which humans are not going to be replaced. Like, if you, I don't know, stuff envelopes for a living, you're probably not working anymore because there's machines that do that kind of thing. Right. But there's certain things that are fundamentally human, that humans do well, that computers cannot do well and replace. And I think that's the part that is really of interest to us and where those two things overlap, the software, technology, and the human part. And how do we unleash the best of what humans can do? So that's the reason why we have a coaching company. That's the reason why we have a training company. And we also have another company called Skillsetter, which is a software company that we built to help people practice and learn interpersonal skills, because it ain't going away. We're still going to have to talk to each other. It's not going away.
No. Again, really resonating with what you're saying. And I think the audience will be resonating with that too. I often tell our clients, we need to invest in our people, because it doesn't matter what industry you're in. And I've got large engineering firms that I'm chairman of their companies, and to hospitals. And, I said, doesn't matter how much we automate, human capital will always be required, right? So at some point, and particularly in the industries where you are customer facing, I don't think we actually teach people enough on how to communicate. I remember when I went back to university to do my MBA, and I'll never forget, everyone was petrified of presentations. So, an examination by presenting. And I found it really disturbing, because I'm just like, hang on a minute, you're all doing MBA and you're all petrified of doing a presentation or working in groups. And I thought to myself, there is something seriously wrong with all these people. Like, what? And I mean, look, everyone then kind of realized, but Kristian, you're like naturally a presenter. So for you, this is, easy. And I said, well, then come and work in my group. If you're struggling, come and do your group assignment with me. And I'll never forget my teaching faculty, professors, all said to me, you're taking these kids on a journey with you. I'm like, kids, these guys are older than me, right? I said, I just look old. But the irony was, it was being able to teach them not to have these fears and to overcome their fears. A lot of it is around the growth mindset. I know you guys do some development work in that area. I write about that topic. But I found it really fascinating, Stephan, that people struggled at that level. And I'm thinking, you're going to be future leaders. So I think absolutely there is a market for what you guys are doing on all those levels, from the software business to the other business.
Yeah.
Now, did I read something? Sorry, go.
Well, yeah, I just want to add a point there, Kristian. I think this is really important, salient point to articulate clearly for the audience here. And that is the intentionality behind improving interpersonal skills. Because you mentioned these folks that were perhaps terrified of being in front of a group or giving a public speech or even working in a group. Well, the reality is, I think we often think about communication skills or leadership skills as something that you have and I don't, right? Or that person has it, that person doesn't. And so we have a fixed mindset around that particular set of skills. And so what we've tried to do with our training through Zarango is come up with training that articulates what those specific skills are. We're trying to take quote unquote soft skills and make them hard, make them concrete, make them clear and observable. Because if you look at, for example, learning how to play the piano, I think we can all understand that you're not going to get good at playing the piano by reading a book. Or you're not going to get great at playing the piano by listening to a podcast of people talking about playing the piano or people playing the piano. right? So why do we fill up our our bags with leadership books at the when we're walking through the airport, or why is it that we listen to podcasts or watch TED Talks or what have you? All those things are great. Don't get me wrong. Don't stop listening to the podcast because I'm trying to put down podcasts. Not at all. Podcasts are useful information. Books are useful information, but you have to practice the skills. You have to spend time practicing. And that requires, first of all, recognizing that your skills as a leader, your communication skills as a manager can be improved. Full stop.
And that's the growth mindset, right? So
100%.
Yeah. And look, what's really interesting there is practice makes perfect. Jim Collins sums up that, luck favors the persistent, right? They're all saying the same thing. If you don't persist with something and practice and fail forward, like I had this conversation with my son recently, we all wanted him to play the piano. And I said it in our house, I said, why are we pushing him to play the piano? Like, if anyone ever told me to do something I didn't want to do, I never would have done it. And Leonardo did quite well, but never practiced. He has my gene, right? Where as a child, you're kind of blessed that you're able to do so many things that you don't practice, right? And so I looked at it and I said, you know what, Leo, I'm going to cancel piano. He looked at me with shock horror. Why? I said, because you don't practice and you're actually not getting any better, right? And he goes, well, my teacher thinks I'm doing okay. I said, imagine what you could do if you practiced. And that's when the truth came. He goes, I don't want to play the piano. Like, I just don't like it. And when we got to it, I said, so what do you want to do? He goes, I want to sing. And so he now is 7, and every Tuesday morning he is in the school choir. And he loves it. He comes home and he's singing the song that he learned, like memorized and he'll practice. And so now I've been turning around saying, so see what you're doing now? And he goes, well, I'm singing. I said, no, you're practicing. I said, you're memorizing over and over, that repetition. And he just looked at me. He was like, you tricked me. I said, no, I didn't trick you. You did that all on your own. And it's so funny. The reason why I'm using my children, I learn a lot from my children. I'm sure, Stephan, you've done too, and you still are, because they're so receptive to learning. And they break down things really simplistically, right? Adults, on the other hand, overcomplicate everything. And it's so challenging. I'm in a very blessed position, as probably you are. I handpick who I want to work with, right? So I when I first started my career, I have that luxury. But every industry I've been in over time, I've been able to get to a point where I handpick who I want to work with. Even when I used to own restaurants and bars, it was, sorry, we're booked. Like, it's like, here are our parameters. This is how you come in. And that ability to say no, and that ability to have the right people in your life makes a big difference too to your learning. And I always say to people, and I want to get your perspective on this, I always say to people, Jim Rohn actually says this, it's the late Jim Rohn, you're the sum of the 5 people that you hang around with most of the time. And that to me applies to also how you learn. If you are around people that are not interested in learning, or with the wrong group of people that are not engaging in the practices that you would engage with, you will not succeed, right? Yes, you might be the 1 in a million that we read about in a magazine one day. And, I'm a bit over listening to all the, I'm the 1 in a million or the 1 in a billion person. The next unicorn I hear about, it's like, come on, that's not, our economy isn't driven by the unicorns. The economy is driven by the mum and dad businesses that are, at the ground level. We're driven by, the leaders that are the middle manager that should be aspiring, that has the talents and ability and growth mindset to go over and beyond. So what's your thinking around that with your experience?
Well, my experience is that, like you said, your son was spending time singing, and you're saying, hey, you're practicing. And he had the luxury of practicing, and it didn't feel like practice, right? It felt great. He enjoyed the practice. And I think a lot of the most gifted athletes, for example, they're gifted not because they're gifted at the sport, but they're gifted at being able to spend time practicing the sport, grinding away, repeating over and over again. And I think there's one other piece that I want to add there, which is I've spent quite a bit of time on a piano myself, and I've barely gotten past chopsticks, but I can play a mean set of chopsticks, but I'm not getting better. So it's purely spending time doing something is not enough. I want to make a distinction between practicing and deliberate practice. So lots of people run every day, or 3 times a week, 4 times a week. That's great fitness. You should definitely do that. Don't stop. Are they getting faster at their 5K, 10K, half marathon runs? Probably not. They're staying healthy. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but they're not necessarily applying the principles of deliberate practice to get faster, better, stronger, etc. So what are some of those core principles that I think people want to be mindful of? It's not just spending time, but spending time on the edge of your ability. Because the more you spend on your edge of ability, the more that edge grows and expands. So I think that's really key.
There's another golden nugget for people. I mean, you want to use the word deliberate or intentional, but either way, practice has to be deliberate or intentional. You need to be very focused. I mean, as an ex-professional athlete, that makes sense to me. And I look back at, even now while I'm talking to you, I'm reflecting back at how we used to train 25 years ago or 23 years ago compared to how they train now. Like, science has really made it intentional, right? It's like, okay, when I was around, we were just starting to learn about HIT training, to get your speed up. As a rugby player, it was all about speed over those 5-10 meters, really explosive, like a 100-meter sprinter. We didn't care about what the outcome was after 50 meters, right? In the front row, it was how quickly could you get off the line over those 10 meters, because those 10 meters was the breakthrough to then get the ball rolling out. And so it was all about this explosive power. So training in the gym was around a lot of leg lifting. But, I now look at the guys that train and I'm thinking, wouldn't it have been cool to have done, is it pyrometrics training, right? Like, where they're using all these other techniques for jumping that impacts the same ability on your sprint. I always say to young people today, you have got it all laid out for you. And now with Google, where you can basically go and watch a YouTube video on almost anything. The question is, and the problem is, make sure you're listening to the right person. And I think that's also the part of being intentional and deliberate around practice, is you can be getting taught by complete bozo, right? Which is not going to help you at all. If anything, it can make life worse. So you've got to be really cautious as to who you engage with. But to get us back on track, Stephan, in terms of, I love where this conversation's gone, but a lot of our listeners love to know about challenges and failure. So I want to ask you a question. What's the biggest challenge that you're facing in your role or in your business right now, and how are you tackling it?
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges I'm facing right now is that we've developed psychological safety-based training, and the focus of that training is all around helping people with interpersonal skills. And I've been out talking to tons of people about this. And the challenge that I'm facing is that there's so many different markets to go after and so many different verticals, and everybody has slightly different needs. And so I want to build a scalable service and a business that I can have maximum impact, right? And being able to have really tight product market fit is where I'm going to work, because I want to make sure that I can serve one audience, go deep with it, help them really customize everything towards that audience, and then move on. So I guess a little bit of it is focus, like finding the focus of the one narrow tight market, servicing it well, and then moving on. We often talk about the bowling pin strategy, where you want to identify what's that first pin, knock it down, then move on to the second pin, because I think the death of any company is trying to do too much and being too broad in their focus. So I'm trying to apply that principle to us. And what's interesting with a lot of the individuals that I talk to, they're coming through our original business, Numi, which is all about coaching. And so they're wanting coaching. And so I'm asking them about what their issues are. And there's all sorts of a variety of different issues. And we tend to get everything from, consumer packaged goods companies to biotech to everything and everything in between. And so for me, trying to figure out, even pro sports, like where do we want to go to work? Because the needs of, say, a pro sports organization is different from a hospital, which is different from an engineering firm.
Absolutely. So, the question then for you is, which market do you see the greatest opportunity to create the most impact? Right? Like that's, that to me, that's the thing that makes the most sense. Sounds easy in theory, but in practice, it's actually quite difficult. But when you were speaking, the words intentional and deliberate came to mind from our previous conversation. And then you said, yes, I need to have a narrow focus. Chet Holmes, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Chet Holmes. He wrote The Ultimate Sales Machine. But Chet's story about when he worked for Warren Buffett's business partner at the magazine really resonated when you were saying that, where he actually forged the idea or the concept of the Dream 100. I did a podcast on this. Russell Brunson has taken the whole collective to another level in simplifying it for the many as opposed to one. But I urge you to, if you've read that, go back, refresh yourself. But there's a lot of really good in narrowing down the market. But I always love to look at the market that's going to give me the greatest impact and who I could serve, because I'm in a very different position than most people. I have a very diverse advisory background, but at the same time, it's all business. So, I'm a specialist in business, but across a lot of diverse. And so that took me a while to understand that and also be able to communicate that to various people. So, Stephan, I think that's the hardest part. No, I agree. It's a big challenge for people, but there's some really good opportunities. I'm a big believer in always, before I engage a consultant or someone to work with us, I always go and have a look at the masters that came before. And because I believe success and failure leave clues. So it's a really good opportunity to go back and review those. What should I ask you that I don't know enough to ask?
Good question. I would look at, maybe the question is, what is at the core of psychological safety? We touched on psychological safety, but we haven't even really answered that question of what is psychological safety. So what is at the core of psychological safety?
Okay, so what is the core of psychological safety?
Well, first, let's answer what psychological safety is for those who don't know. So psychological safety, as defined by Amy Edmondson, who's the thought leader, Harvard prof, done lots of research, 25 years plus of research around this concept. She defines psychological safety as the belief that within your team or within your work environment, you can speak up, say what's on your mind, express concerns, admit mistakes without the fear of reprimand. So you feel safe in being able to speak up, basically. And so that's what it is. And it's proven to be highly correlated with high performance teams. And Google probably did the most famous study, many of your listeners, I don't know how many, but I'm sure some have heard of Project Aristotle. That's Google's project where they analyzed psychological safety and what makes a high performance team. And so when we look at everything around psychological safety, what is like sort of at the kernel, the core of psychological safety, and ultimately the way I see it is it's a collection of, it's a sum total of all of the communication that occurred up until now. So if you're a member of a team, your degree of psychological safety that you're going to feel has everything to do with all of the little communications that have occurred every day. It's how someone says hello in the morning and how they say goodbye at the end of the day and everything in between. And the degree to which you feel psychologically safe will differ in different environments. So if you're in your team, maybe it's one way. If you're in a different team, you might feel it a different way. And I think we can all relate to having that feeling of a really positive experience on a team. And that's what it feels like when you feel like you can be yourself, show up, give it your best, contribute, and be heard and understood and appreciated. So that's where we go to work in our training, is to help and support leaders and managers and team members to be able to have those conversations that foster psychological safety and create psychological safety on an ongoing basis, because it ebbs and flows. It's not like, yay, we got it and we stuck it on the shelf. We bought psychological safety, everybody. It's right here. It's not like that, right? It comes and goes.
It's great. So many people have that philosophy of, I bought it, it's on the shelf. And I really like that. Stephan, there's been some really good golden nuggets that I've actually really enjoyed. It's put me a big smile on my face. It's so, I always, I have the coolest gig in the world, right? In my job, in my life, my family, but also the ability to be able to interview really neat people. And I learned so much from just listening to the quirks. And that was another one. I mean, I'm making notes. So I keep writing down, making notes for myself, for the show notes, but more importantly, because they're things that are appealing to me. Thank you for sharing that. I also heard a lot of Brené Brown in the words that you were using. So, and I'm sure a lot of listeners were thinking the same thing. It's like, you got to show up, right? You got to be brave. And it's like, I'm like, right, there's Brené Brown coming out. So it's fantastic. And look, it's great that we're having more of these discussions. And, look, moving on from that, then, let's talk a little bit about failure. What's your biggest failure? And what did you learn from that experience? Maybe we can tie in some of the stuff that we've talked about.
Oh, I've had a lot of failures. I think the biggest failure, I guess it's all how you frame it. When we first started up NUMMI, we made all the mistakes you could imagine. And the main thing, our main approach was, okay, let's create this system where any two people coach each other. And when we brainstorm and discuss different features, we immediately thought, we need that. That's core. And so we spent, in retrospect, with 2020 perspective, we spent way too much time and money building something that we didn't know if people wanted. And, I had the really good fortune, I think it was in 2007, Eric Ries came to Vancouver. And this is Eric Ries before he wrote the Lean Startup.
Lean Startup, yeah.
Yeah. And so it was a nascent idea. And there was, I think, 22 people maybe in this tiny little workshop. It was, come for beers after work kind of thing. It was 6:30 at night. And here he was with a flip chart, drawing stuff on it, saying, okay, here's the waterfall approach. You spend all this time and resources and you build something that nobody wants. Well, here's a different approach, the agile approach. And now we've heard so much about agile and lean and all that, but this was mind blowing when I first heard it. And we made all the mistakes, spent way too much time and money building something that nobody wanted. And so once we launch, we had to really go to work to pivot and find something that we could actually make money on. I think it was also coupled with at the time, remember, there's a mid 2000s, 2007, 2008. You had things like YouTube absolutely blowing up. And what was their revenue model? They didn't really, they were burning money, and Facebook was burning money, and all these companies were burning money. And so we just thought, well, let's just burn money, I guess. not such a good approach when you have a niche product.
But you learn from it, right?
100%.
And what I'm hearing is that not only did you have that failure experience, but while you were failing, you were still going out and learning. And it was through your strong desire for self-development to be better, right? To believe that your talents and skills can be taught. Having that growth mindset led you to that little workshop. And little did you know that little workshop would go on to sell 4 million copies of a book and change the lives of many people. I mean, I use a lean canvas in our 90-day sprints program, and I've actually advanced the lean canvas to being a opportunity or problem-solving tool for existing businesses every 90 days, because it's now essentially design thinking, right? So, and some people, a lot of people don't know how to think strategically. In fact, I would argue that majority of the human population don't understand strategic thinking. It's why there's been so many great books written about it, but the books are so great that no one understands them, right? Because exactly like you said, you read them, they sit on the shelf, you don't practice it, because so many people don't get the opportunity to think strategically. Whereas I disagree. I think everyone can think strategically every single day, because what is strategic thinking, Stephan? It's the thinking before the plan, and what does a lean canvas afford you to do? To do exactly that thinking before the plan. Now, what comes before a plan, right, is the thinking. But what comes after a plan? The execution. The problem is that everybody wants to race to execution because everybody's got a great idea. But, I always say to people, ideas are like assholes. Everyone's got one, right? So at the end of the day, your idea may not be any better, but also, like you said, you spend so much time building a product that you don't even know that your customers want. I'm at my 79th venture and I'm about to start an 80th. And I can assure you that the first 20 were quite successful, believe it or not. I was very lucky because I was very clear about being a businessman and an entrepreneur. And I had a niche and I knew how to go after it. It was when I started diversifying that I thought I was the gift, right, of starting ventures, that I learned some really harsh lessons. And why? Because I started building products I wanted, not products that consumers wanted. And I started losing, and I lost catastrophically, and I failed. So I was one of those people that didn't understand the philosophy of fail quickly, fail often, right? And, surprisingly, I was very blessed. I became the entrepreneur in resident at a Sandstone University, where I was able to bring all of those learnings. And, there was a lot of people questioning, how is he being appointed the inaugural entrepreneur in resident? He's not megally successful. He's not an Elon Musk. Elon Musk is one of those 1 in a billion people, right? And we raised $189 million in 11 months. And I sat back and I said, that's exactly why everybody chose me, because I knew exactly how to teach people how to fail first, right? And then I use Jim Collins's philosophies a lot, which is first who, then what, And so all these startups that came into the incubator was like, I've got this amazing product. I said, but no one wants it. Well, what do you mean no one wants it? I said, have you asked anybody? And these people would look at me and they'd hate on me. And the smart ones would come back and say, actually, we've just gone out and done some metric testing. You're right. No one likes our product. How do we fix it? It's okay. Let's have a look at what's good about your product. Let's go and ask a whole bunch of people what they like. And then let's get rid of everything that they don't like. And instead of having 15 different moving parts, let's have one that they all love. And it's, and this goes back to your point, Stephan. Stephan. I don't know why I keep wanting to say this because I keep reading it. It's like, it's Stephen, it's Stephan. Stephan, going back to your point about the problem, the biggest problem that you're facing right now. It's apply that lean canvas philosophy to it, and so I really love that share about, where you failed. I think it's so relevant to anyone listening. I think it's relevant to any new listeners. Don't go out and build products that you don't even know customers want. Instead, go out and solve problems that exist. And, my philosophy around startups is go out and solve the biggest problem that everybody wants solved. And a really good example of a startup that's done that is Canva. Melanie Perkins and her partners, Australian unicorn, phenomenal story. Not everyone's a graphic designer. And so they went out and built this platform. Now, the platform's gotten a little crazy because now everybody thinks they're a graphic designer if they know how to use Canva. And that's not true, right? But Canva is such a fabulous tool for everyday mum and dad businesses who can't afford $100 an hour to go and hire a graphic designer. And they can do their social media posting and everything. But very clever because it filled a huge gap in the market that already, the biggest loser has been Adobe, right? But I think in many ways, Adobe's gained because now they've got all these professionals that stick to their product. And now the professionals have gotten smart and are building, content for Canva and sort of saying, hey, mum and dad, we'll build you the base templates. Now they're uploadable for Canva. Now you've got your brand. So, there's some really cool stuff out of that. Anyway, I can get lost in this all day long. Stephan, if you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell them?
I would tell them focus on the challenge, not on the results. That's it. There's a growth mindset right there. Focus on the challenge, lean into the challenge, and let the results be what the results will be. Because if you focus on just the results or trying to get positive reinforcement for being the winner or the best, then you don't take on the hard things in life and try to take that path of least resistance. Well, that's what I would tell my 18-year-old self.
I think it's, again, exceptionally good wisdom in that. I think that we could talk about the why behind that for a very long time. So I may not go and ask you that because I've just realized we've been talking for almost an hour already. One last question before we jump into the 5 in 5. What's the most important thing that you've learned in your life?
It's that growth mindset, Kristian. My business partner and I, we come across difficult challenges at times. And when we do, we always think, and this takes reframing, because often it's like, oh man, this is so hard. And then we say, awesome, that's great. It's good that this is hard because that means not everyone's going to do it. It's a little bit of our competitive advantage, if you will, like hard things are worth doing. Well, that's not true. Not all hard things are worth doing, I suppose, but we try to reframe all the challenges that we face as, okay, this is good. This is really good. So let's just keep going. And
reframing is actually a really cool technique for anyone that doesn't actually know it. Look it up. I use reframing with my children when we're going through things and learning. But also, if you reframe enough, particularly around growth mindset, like developing a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, you can actually, it becomes subconscious. So one of the things that everybody, when they work with someone like me or even members of my team now, we never look at problems, right? A problem is actually just a challenge, right? And a challenge is actually an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think that sums up your notion of reframing. I was just trying to demonstrate it. So, and then people find that really, I make that sound easy, but that's actually really hard for a lot of people. They wake up in the morning, and for some people, waking up is hard. And that might be mental, right? But it might just be something that, they've just constantly told themselves, waking up sucks. Me, as soon as my eyes wake up, the first thing I do is I look at my clock and I'm like, did I wake up like before I was meant to wake up? And it freaks people like my wife. She's always like, Kristian, you do that now. Like, we've been together almost 10 years and you wake up, you don't have an alarm. Your body clock tells you exactly what time, but you wake up and I notice sometimes that you look at your watch and I'm like, yeah. I said, why? And she's like, why do you do that? I said, because if it's like, I wake up at 5 o'clock every morning, right? And if it's 4:30, I get excited and I jump out of bed. If it's 4, I'll put my head back on the pillow and get an extra 30 minutes sleep. But if it's 4:30, I'm like, yeah, I'm up. Let's go. Let's go take on the day. And no matter what challenges I'm facing, I do it with a smile because I love it. Because a challenge is an opportunity. So again, that notion, is there anything you want to add around reframing that the audience might relate to?
Well, the one part I guess I wanted to add about the reframing is it's not silver lining it. I think we want to make a distinction, right? Because if something bad happens, you can silver line it and still feel like you failed or was a failure. We're not talking about that. I think we're talking about reframing is just changing the perspective you have on that thing. Right. And not just sugarcoating it, not just pretending like it's better, but actually legitimately looking at it from a new perspective. One of the things I like to do is put myself in different people's eyes, right? Like, how would Elon Musk look at this problem, right? Or how would Oprah Winfrey or whoever, right? Fill in the blank. Sometimes I also wonder, how would my dog look at this, right? If I'm feeling particularly stressed, how would my dog look at this? Yeah, he would go, "What's for dinner?"
I was about to say, so where's my sugar?
So, sometimes when you're taking yourself a little too seriously, it's good to reframe it and remind yourself that maybe you can act like your dog or look at it through the eyes of a snack eating puppy.
Look, Stephan, I think there's a lot of truth in that last statement too. Don't take the fun out of something difficult. Like I, for example, a lot of people use humor when they're stressed. But that is another really cool technique in that is, don't sugarcoat something. It's real, but you got to accept it. Like to me, when we fail, we love in our organization, we fail often and we fail quickly now. I will never fail catastrophically ever again. And, people say to me, "Oh, Kristian, don't say ever." I said, no. I said, because I have systems in place now that do not allow me to fail catastrophically. If a black swan event comes by and wipes me out, that's not failure. That's something, as the term suggests, a black swan event. It will wipe out a lot of people. Right? COVID was a black swan event. But I think as a lot of great businesses flourished during that time because they were able to adapt, reframe, deal with adversity and agitation. I built significant businesses during that period. Why? Because I had my catastrophic failure during the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9, where I lost everything. So I was already prepared for the economic downside, which then never came, because of all the stimulus. And now, America, Canada, Canada's been dealing with, you guys have been dealing with drought. So you've got, canola markets that have, that capitulated around you. But there are other ways. And I think that's, I looked at so many people struggling during COVID because they weren't able to go, hang on, it's a switch. Yes, we're in this life-threatening, catastrophic, mega media circus, right? And it doesn't matter what people, opinions on, whether COVID was what it was or what it was what it was. We lived it. Governments shut down countries and, we went through all this stuff. But I actually believe that a lot of people came out better. I think that businesses were able to reinvent. You look at businesses that were purely bricks and mortar and now hybrid. And they allowed their younger people in those organizations to carry them through. The older people who were struggling allowed the younger people to have a voice. So I look at all the types of adversities and, and I look at them again as opportunities, to pivot and change and blossom. Your thoughts on that, Steph?
Well, I mean, to go full circle here, Kristian, that was basically what I said at the beginning about parenting, right? Put your children in a position where they can fail. And that happened on a global scale with the pandemic. And some people thrived and others couldn't. And it's not necessarily any fault to them. I'm not suggesting that anybody whose business failed during COVID, it was, all their fault. And right, that we're not saying that. It was an opportunity for many to reevaluate and go, what are we going to do now? How are we going to deal with this? And, a lot of psychological safety, coming back to that concept, is built around innovation and how teams interact to solve really complex, challenging problems, because we make good decisions when we have good information, and good information is better when we have everybody contributing. One of the metaphors we were talking about today is like an iceberg, and what people are saying is the visible part of the iceberg, and what they're thinking is down below the surface. And what you want to do in an environment of psychological safety is basically have that entire iceberg visible. Now, imagine if the Titanic could see all of the iceberg, right? Oh. If you, as a business operator, you're running the Titanic and you're floating, you're driving through the sea, and you could see all of the icebergs because all of your people are openly sharing everything that they know, and they're contributing all their ideas, and they're saying, hey, what if we do some hybrid thing? What if, we can't have people in our restaurant, but what if we deliver to them instead, right? Think about how different your business could be.
Absolutely. And again, as I said, COVID was a black swan event. So we can't, the people that failed, some couldn't, if you were in, there were some industries that were just wiped out, right? And you've got to pick yourself up again and go again, just more intelligently, as Edison has repeatedly reminded us throughout his e-block journey. All right, so Stephan, we're going to come up to a wrap. So we love to finish with the fast 5 in 5. Are you ready?
I am ready, Kristian.
All right. What makes you feel inspired?
My kids.
Awesome. What is the best compliment that you've ever received?
People have told me that I'm charismatic.
Yeah, cool. And if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
It would be to elevate your team to generate better results.
Best book recommendation?
Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson.
Okay, cool. And then if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Oof, those are good questions.
And by the way, I stole all those questions from other people. Those last 5 are like my 5 favorite questions. You're doing awesome, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I've asked that same question myself, so I should have a good answer ready at the ready. billboard with anything on it, it would be something to the effect of, be your best, keep going. That's it. Be your best and keep going.
Never say die.
Never say die.
It's not like listening to you, I'm like, never say die. I'm pretty sure that was an Energizer battery commercial.
Probably. Yeah.
Stephan, look, thank you so much for joining us. That just went super fast. It was a wonderful conversation. I'm really glad that my team found you. I think there's so many golden nuggets. I mean, the one that's really resonating with me still is, yes, we talked about it from our kids' perspective, but it's anyone, put them in an environment where they can fail. We should be encouraging people to push themselves and get out of their comfort zone. I'm excited to see where you guys land in terms of the software business. And I can't wait to see the journey for both of the other organizations, for Numi and Zarango. And I think the other thing that really hit home was deliberate practice. And I think that they're the things for our audience. And if you've got any final comments for our audience today before we wrap up the show.
I think it's reiterating what I said earlier. Based on that deliberate practice concept, you can't learn to play the piano by reading a book. So you can't improve your interpersonal skills, your leadership skills by watching YouTube. You got to practice new skills and get some feedback and try new things. And that's how you're going to get better. Be deliberate about it. Get input from people who are experts in that area, and you can improve your interpersonal skills, your public speaking skills, communication skills, all of it.
Stephan Wiedner, thank you so very much for your insight, for your time. Thank you to all our listeners. You could be listening to 1,000 other podcasts out there, yet you're choosing to listen to this one, and you're planting us in the top 100, which is really cool and amazing. I'm absolutely certain that this episode will inspire people. As I said, even I have left here today and I have at least 5 key takeaways that I'm going to put into practice immediately. And I think, Stephan, that's what you really shared with us today, is not only your wisdom, but this notion of psychological safety, and more importantly, the real care that you have. That's what I feel when I speak to you, is this real care to change the world, right? And I think that that's really important. I want to thank my team at Business Growth Mindset for putting up with me and always making sure that we have exciting guests to join our Top Achievers podcast. And for anyone new, please make sure that you do subscribe. And also change your notification settings, because these platforms, be it Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the 3 primaries that we use, won't alert you if you haven't changed those notification settings. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, thank you, Stephan, and to all of our listeners, live with purpose.
Are you ready to start taking action on your business? Would you like to spend more time with your family? Then call 1300-643-229 and start building momentum right now. I know you're busy. In fact, you are so busy that you don't have time to work on your business or yourself. Often tossing and turning at night, worrying about the how-tos and the cash flow. How on earth can you possibly get off the hamster wheel so that you can take a helicopter view to see where you'll be in 90 days, 1 year, or 3 years from now? In this program, I will take you from sleepless nights to blissful sleep. You'll have more time with your family and you will have the clarity and direction so you can grow and flourish. Call 1-300-643-229 now and start building momentum.